Alright, what's going on, guys? Today I'm going to be giving my NFL DraftKings picks for Week 3. Thank you so much for clicking on the video. If this is your first time on my channel, be sure to subscribe. I would really appreciate it. I do make these NFL videos weekly, every week for the upcoming slate, and also do MLB and NBA videos daily. So be sure to subscribe if you are new to the channel. And everyone, be sure to drop a like on the video as well. I would really appreciate that. If you are new, what I do with these videos, I basically go position by position, just give you a couple plays I like at each position. I'll try and go each price tier, give some guys up top, some guys in the mid tier, and then some value plays if there are value plays at a certain position. I can't hit on every single player because the video will take forever, so I just give a couple plays I like at each position, and then as I give plays, I'll sort of build a core of about 5 plays, 5 of my guys that I'll have some of the most exposure to. 5 guys that you should definitely be including in some of your lineups. But yeah, that's pretty much what I do with these videos. Let's go ahead and get started looking at quarterback. So for quarterback this week, unlike last week it was very popular to pay up for quarterback. I don't think that's going to be the case this week. There are some guys up top that are definitely in good spots. In the 7K range, there's probably one guy I'm going to be targeting in the 7K range, and that's Matt Ryan. I don't think I'm going to have any exposure to Drew Brees or Tom Brady. Might have a little bit of Aaron Rodgers because he's at home, and we know Rodgers plays very well at home. But probably my favorite guy in the upper tier is Matt Ryan. But when you get to the 6K and 5K range, I think that's where a lot of exposure is going to be. I think that's where most of the ownership is going to go, is towards those middle tier guys. But I definitely think there are options up top that are definitely in play. Matt Ryan being one of them. He's probably going to be the quarterback I have a lot of exposure to this week. I'm going to go ahead and plug him into the core at 7,100. I just think this is a really good spot for Matt Ryan, going up against a Detroit defense that's pretty bad against the pass. So far this year, Detroit, they're allowing 235 passing yards a game, and you got to think one of those games was against the Giants, and Eli Manning really didn't do much that game. So that did kind of help their ranking. But this Detroit defense, not really good against the pass. I think Matt Ryan's going to play very well here. They will be playing in Detroit, which is a dome, so you don't really have to worry about that. Matt Ryan used to playing in a dome in Atlanta, and domes usually do play well for offenses. I think this game could be very high scoring. I do like Matthew Stafford on the other side. He is a quarterback I will definitely have some exposure to this week. But Matt Ryan, one of my favorite quarterbacks this week, is 7,100. I think he plays well here. We could see this game be very high scoring, could be a shootout. So I think Ryan definitely has a lot of upside in this spot. So I'm going to be rolling with him as probably my most exposure quarterback I have the most exposure to at 7,100. But other quarterbacks I like in the cheaper end, Cam Newton's one guy I want to mention. Cam's been absolutely terrible this year, has had 2 really bad games, especially with the DraftKings scoring. Only put up 14 DK points against the 49ers and put up 11 against Buffalo. 2 really bad games. Cam's been missing throws. He hasn't really been able to hit his guys. But he is in a really good spot to bounce back. Playing at home against the New Orleans defense. It's bottom in the league, one of the worst defenses, probably the worst defense in the NFL. They're bottom in the league in passing yards a game, allowing 388.5 passing yards a game, which is dead last. They're allowing 32.5 points per game, which is next to last. 512 total yards per game so far this year, which is dead last. So obviously it's a great spot for Cam. We haven't seen Cam look very good this year, but he is definitely in a prime spot to bounce back. Going up against the Saints defense is just terrible. I will be having some exposure to Cam this week. Not sure how much. I am kind of worried just because how bad he's looked this year. But this is definitely a good bounce back spot for Cam at home against a terrible Saints defense. So he's one guy I like in the 6K range. And like I said earlier with Matt Ryan, also like the other side of that game, definitely going to have some exposure to Matthew Stafford. I think he's definitely a good option if you are looking for a little bit of a cheaper quarterback. It's just 6,200 in a game that should shoot out. The game does have a pretty high total. So I do like Matthew Stafford, looking for a little bit of a cheaper quarterback. Then another cheap quarterback I like, just under him, I really like Kirk Cousins this week. I think that Oakland-Washington game could be high scoring. It does have a fairly high total this week. So Kirk Cousins is a guy we'll have some exposure to. That Washington offense, they do throw the ball a ton. Cousins, he's always throwing the ball. They didn't throw as much against the Rams. Cousins only threw the ball 27 times, but against the Eagles in their first game, Cousins threw it 40 times. I would imagine they were playing from behind that game. but there's a good chance they could be playing from behind against a really good Oakland offense. So Kirk Cousins, a guy I do like at the 6,100, a guy I think's in a really good spot. Playing at home, Sunday night game, we might see some low ownership on Kirk Cousins, so I think he's definitely in play at 6,100. And then there is one guy I want to mention under 6K, and that's Carson Wentz at home going up against the Giants. Obviously a bad matchup. The Giants defense is pretty good against the pass, but Carson Wentz, I just think he's too cheap for how well he's performed this year. He's throwing the ball a ton, which is what you want from your quarterback. You want your quarterback to be throwing the ball. You don't obviously want him just to be handing it off to the running back. In Wentz's 2 games this year, he's thrown the ball 39 and 46 times, put up 23 and 28 DraftKings points. So Wentz has looked really good this year. Obviously, it is a tough matchup, but the Giants' pass defense is very good. But I think just given Wentz's price tag and how much the Eagles throw the ball, I think he is a very good option at 5,900. If you are looking for somewhat of a cheaper quarterback, I think he is in play, just given his price tag and how much volume he gets. But yeah, those are just some quarterbacks I like this week. If I pay up, which I will definitely be doing this week, I think the guy I'm probably going to look to is Matt Ryan. He's probably the guy I'll have the most exposure to this week. And then in the mid-tier, I do like Cam Newton this week at 6,600. Obviously a great matchup against the Saints. I think he's in a prime bounce-back spot, so I do like him. And then in the lower 6K range, I like Matthew Stafford from the other side of that Atlanta game. I think that game could be a shootout, so I think Stafford's definitely in play. And also like Kirk Cousins from that Oakland-Washington game, another game that I think could shoot out, so I think he's a good play at 6,100. Then under 6K, the guy I like for some value if I'm looking to spend up at other positions and need a cheap quarterback. I think Carson Wentz is in play at 5,900. Just how much the Eagles throw the ball and how cheap Wentz is, how well he's performed this year, I think he's a good play at 5,900. So yeah, those are just some quarterbacks I like this week. Let's go ahead and move on to running back. Alright, so for running back this week, up top we got Le'Veon Bell. Le'Veon Bell very cheap this week at just 8,800. I believe this is the cheapest we've seen Bell in a long time. I saw someone tweet out I think this is the cheapest we've seen Bell since like November of 2016, which is just crazy. But he's obviously this cheap for a reason. He hasn't really performed well this year. He's had 2 pretty rough games. Obviously that terrible game against Cleveland, I was on him that week. Only put up 7 DraftKings points. Then against Minnesota last week, put up 13.1 DK points. And Bell is in a decent spot here. This Bears front, it definitely has improved. So far this year, they're only allowing 90 rushing yards a game, which is 15th in the league. But I don't think matchups really something you worry about with Le'Veon Bell. We know he's going to be heavily involved. He played a ton of snaps against Minnesota. I believe he played like over 90%. He ran the ball 27 times in that game, got 4 targets. So the volume was definitely there for Le'Veon Bell. This guy could break out at just any point, and I definitely don't want to be left out when he does break out. So I probably will have some exposure to Le'Veon Bell. Won't be that much, maybe just 1 or 2 lineups. But this guy just has so much upside. He could definitely break out at any time, and it could come this week against the Bears. So obviously I like Le'Veon Bell at 8,800. Really cheap price tag for him. That's what's really attracted me to him is his price. I think he's just too cheap for how much volume and how good of a player he is. So obviously love Le'Veon Bell at 8,800. Another guy I like in the 7K range, AJAYI going up against the Jets. AJAYI is another guy that gets a ton of volume, a heavy workload. In his first game against the Chargers, got 28 rushing attempts, put up 122 yards. Also saw 2 targets as well. So AJAYI gets a ton of work in the running game. Also is involved in the pass as well. He is in a great spot here. Against the Jets' rush defense is just not really good anymore. They traded away Sheldon Richardson. And now this Jets defense is bottom in the league in rushing yards allowed, allowing 185 rushing yards so far this year per game, which is last in the league. Also allowing the most points per game as well. So a really good spot for AJAYI. He is really expensive, but with how much volume he gets, I think he is definitely in play at 7,700. Will have some exposure to AJAYI. If I look to that 7K range for running back, definitely will be considering him. 7,700. But the guy I'll probably have the most exposure to, the guy I took last week, just continues to perform well, is Ty Montgomery at 6,900 going up against the Bengals. I'm going to go ahead and plug him into the core. I just think Ty Montgomery is just too cheap. We could see this guy wind up, at the end of the year, wind up being one of the top fantasy running backs. The volume this guy gets, it's just insane. He should definitely be more expensive than 6,900. In his 2 games this year, hasn't really rushed the ball a ton, only 19 and 10 rushing attempts against Seattle and Atlanta. But the passing game is where Montgomery gets a lot of work. 4 and 7 targets in his first 2 games this year. And he's put up 19 and 29 DraftKings points in his first 2 games. So Montgomery just continues to produce. You would think he's going to be heavily involved in the passing game this week. The Packers, they'll probably be without Jordy Nelson. I'm not sure if Nelson's playing. I think he's like a 50-50 to play. And I believe Randall Cobb is also hurt as well. So they're going to rely on Montgomery. They might run the ball a little bit more since they are without some of their key receivers. Maybe they'll lean on Montgomery to run the ball. But he'll also be heavily involved in the passing game as well. So I think Ty Montgomery is a very good option at 6,900. I think the guy's just too cheap. By the end of the year, we could see him being one of the highest priced running backs. He's just going to continue to produce all year. He gets the workload, he gets the volume, great cash game play, has the upside for tournaments. Ty Montgomery, probably one of my favorite running backs on this slate, the ones I'll have the most exposure to. So I like him at 6,900, plugging him into the core. And then looking for some other running backs. There aren't a ton of value running backs I really like this week. So in that same mid-tier, I like Devonta Freeman going up against Detroit. We've seen Freeman sort of carry the workload. He hasn't really been getting vultured a ton by Tevin Coleman. Usually when the Falcons get down to the red zone, usually Freeman's in there. And we saw that against Green Bay. I believe he had 2 rushing touchdowns in that game. He had 2 rushing touchdowns. I think they both came from like in the red zone, inside the 10. So if the Falcons do get in the red zone, Freeman's going to be the guy they rely on. So I think he is in a good spot here in a game that could be a high scoring. Freeman is the guy that does get a lot of work in the running game, but is also involved in the passing game as well. He's put up 11 and 24 DraftKings points in his 2 games this year. And after that big game on Sunday night, he saw his price decrease to 6,700. So the guy is definitely underpriced for the volume he gets. I think he's definitely in play at 6,700. If I'm looking in that same range, I definitely like Montgomery for just 200 more. I think if you are looking for a little bit of a contrarian option, Devonta Freeman is a guy I would be considering at 6,700. And then there is one value running back I want to hit on. Under 5K, a cheap guy I really like is Chris Carson at 4,900 going up against the Titans. Carson, he's sort of taken over as the lead running back for the Seahawks. He was heavily involved in their last game out against the 49ers. He rushed the ball 20 times, also saw 2 targets as well. The Seahawks do have C.J. Prosise, who is kind of involved in the passing game. But Chris Carson's definitely their workhorse running back. So I think he's definitely in play at just 4,900 if you are looking for a cheap guy. And with how bad Russell Wilson has played this year, Seattle could start leaning more on the running game. So I think Chris Carson's a guy you could definitely consider if you are looking for a cheap running back. I like him at just 4,900. And yeah, so those are just some running backs I like this week. If I look to pay up, obviously I'm going to have some exposure to Le'Veon Bell. I have exposure every single week. The guy just has so much upside. He's due to break out at any point, so I do like him at 8,800. AJAYI, another guy I like at 7,700. I think he's a very good option. Ty Montgomery, the guy I have probably the most exposure to at 6,900. Probably one of my favorite running backs this week. Then under him, if I look for a little bit of a contrarian option in tournaments, I like Devonta Freeman, 6,700. And then if I look for a cheap running back, there aren't a ton, but one guy I do like is Chris Carson, just 4,900. But yeah, those are just some running backs I like this week. Let's go ahead and move on to wide receiver. Alright, so at wide receiver this week, up top we got Julio Jones going up against the Lions. Julio Jones, definitely my favorite wide receiver on this slate. I am going to be pairing him with Matt Ryan in the core at 9,300. I think this is just a smash spot for Julio Jones. We know this guy has a ton of upside. And playing in a game that could be high scoring, I think Jones is a very good option at 9,300. He is expensive, but there is a ton of value, especially at wide receiver, that I like. That makes it pretty easy to fit in Julio. Julio was in a prime spot to have a monster game last week against Green Bay. Came out hot. I believe he had like 4 catches for like 90 yards in the first half, and only finished the game with 5 catches for 108 yards. So definitely cooled off in that second half. Julio hasn't caught a touchdown yet, but I think that's going to change this week. I think Julio finds the end zone this week, and I think him and Matt Ryan both have very solid games. So I love Julio, pairing him with Matt Ryan, my favorite quarterback wide receiver combo this week. In a game that could have the potential to be a shootout. Julio Jones, one of my favorite wide receivers this week, and I'm plugging him into the core at 9,300. And then looking for some cheaper wide receivers, since we paid up for Julio, going to need some guys to fill out the other two spots that are relatively cheap. And one guy I like in the mid 6K range, Jarvis Landry, mainly a DraftKings play. Don't know if I would play him on FanDuel. Landry's more of a play you want on PPR sites because the guy just catches so many passes. In his first game against the Chargers and the Dolphins' first game against the Chargers, he was targeted 15 times, caught 13 passes for 78 yards, finished with 20 DraftKings points in their first game against the Chargers. And Landry is definitely in another good spot here against a pretty bad Jets defense. So I think he's a very good option. I think he's a very good cash game option. Just because of how many targets he gets, the volume's always there. Anybody that's seeing 15 plus targets definitely has to be into consideration. So I do like Jarvis Landry, specifically on DraftKings where it's full PPR. Just because he catches so many passes, don't think I would play him on FanDuel. But on DK where it's full PPR, I think Jarvis Landry is a very good option at 6,800. Then some cheaper wide receivers I like that we can fit in with Julio. One guy that I think is going to be pretty popular if Jordy Nelson is out is Devonta Adams at just 5,600. Also do want to mention that Randall Cobb is also questionable for this game as well. So if Cobb and Nelson are both out, Devonta Adams should easily see 10 plus targets, which makes him a great cash game play. Nelson did get hurt very early in their game against Atlanta. Devonta Adams saw 10 targets in that game, caught 8 passes for 99 yards, had 1 touchdown, finished with 23 DraftKings points, was 1 yard shy of the 100-yard bonus. And I believe the pass that he caught to get him 99 yards, he got tackled at the 1, so he pretty much should have had 100 yards and another touchdown as well. So Adams should have had a monster game against Atlanta, but still finished well, finished with 23.9 DraftKings points. I think he's another very good option at 5,600. I just think he's too cheap for how much volume he's going to get. If Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb are both out, or even if one of them's both out, specifically Jordy, I think if Jordy is out, then Devonta Adams becomes a very good play at just 5,600. Especially in cash games where you want guys that are getting targets. I do like Devonta Adams at 5,600. And then, like I said, there are some cheap receivers I like, lower 4K range. 2 guys I want to hit on that I will have some exposure to. The first guy is DEVIN Funchess at just 4,200 going up against the Saints. Greg Olsen has already been ruled out for this game. I believe he's out for a while. He's got a broken foot, I believe. And when Olsen did go out in their last game against Buffalo, Funchess did start to see some targets. He caught 4 passes for 68 yards, saw 7 targets, finished with 10.8 DraftKings points. And he's obviously in a really good spot here against the Saints, a terrible pass defense. I think Funchess is definitely in play at 4,200. He should see the targets with Greg Olsen out. And it's obviously a really good matchup. So if you are looking for a cheap wide receiver, I do like DEVIN Funchess at just 4,200. I think he's probably a cash game play, more of tournaments. I don't think he has like 30-point upside. But for cash games, just 4,200. A guy that should see close to 10 targets, I would believe, and a really good matchup. Makes him a very good cash game play. So like Funchess, if you are looking for a cheap wide receiver. Then another cheap guy at 4K, probably another really good cash game play, is Rashard Higgins going up against the Colts. Higgins is another guy that should see a ton of targets, and it's very cheap. With Corey Coleman now out with a broken hand, and Kenny Britt just not playing well, Rashard Higgins really stepping up as the #1 receiver for the Browns. He is heavily leaned on by Deshaun Kaiser. Kaiser targeted him 11 times in their last game against Baltimore. He caught 7 passes for 95 yards, finished with 16.9 DraftKings points. So I think Rashard Higgins is a guy you should look to if you are looking for a cheap wide receiver. I love the fact that he's just 4K. He's probably going to see a ton of targets now with Corey Coleman out. And he gets a great matchup against a really bad Colts defense. So if you are looking for another cheap wide receiver, I really like Rashard Higgins. Probably a really good cash game play. Not sure how I'd use him in tournaments. But for cash games, any guy that's going to see 10 plus targets and is only 4K, obviously you want that for cash. So Rashard Higgins, looking for a cheap wide receiver, I like him at 4,000. And yeah, guys, so those are just some receivers I like this week. If I'm paying up, or if I look to pay up, definitely Julio Jones will be the guy I have the most exposure to. Then in the mid-tier, I like Jarvis Landry, specifically on PPR sites like DraftKings. I think he's a very good option. Devonta Adams, another guy I like, just because they'll see a ton of volume with Jordy Nelson out, and possibly Randall Cobb out as well. Adams should definitely see a ton of targets, so I like him as well. And then 2 cheapies I like are DEVIN Funchess and Rashard Higgins. But yeah, that's pretty much it for wide receiver. Let's go ahead and move on to tight end. Alright, so at tight end this week, I don't think I'm going to be looking to pay up much here. Gronk is questionable against Houston, so I'm not even sure if he's going to play. I probably wouldn't be playing him at 6,800 anyway, so I don't like Gronk. Travis Kelce I do like, but I don't really want to pay $6K for a tight end. But Kelce is definitely heavily involved. He is heavily targeted, so he is obviously a good option. The guy I probably would have the most exposure to if I did pay up would be Zach Ertz. Ertz has just seen a ton of volume these past two games. He's got 8 and 10 targets against Washington and Kansas City, put up 17 and 14 DraftKings points, had 97 and 93 yards in those two games, and was also just a few yards shy of the 100-yard bonus in both of those games. So Zach Ertz has played very well this year. It's definitely a small sample size, only 2 games, but we're seeing Carson Wentz heavily rely on him, so if I was to pay up at tight end, he probably would be the guy I would go with. But I'm looking towards the cheaper end for tight end this week, towards the 4K and 3K range. At 4K, I like Martellus Bennett going up against Cincinnati. I feel like with Nelson and Cobb both questionable, if they do miss, we could see Marty Bennett gain some targets. In his last game against Atlanta, he saw 11 targets in that game, only caught 5 passes for 47 yards, but any tight end that's 4K is going to see a lot of targets, nearly 10 targets a game. I think they do make for a really good play. So with Nelson and Cobb both questionable, if they do miss, Bennett could see some increased targets, so I do like him at 4K. Then another guy I like in the 3K range, mid 3K, Jack Doyle at 3,600 going up against the Browns. He's another guy that's sort of been leaned heavily on. With Andrew Luck out, Jacoby Brissett has started to lean on Doyle. Doyle saw 8 targets in his last game against Arizona, caught all 8 passes for 79 yards, put up 15.9 DraftKings points in his last game against the Cardinals. Obviously a very good matchup here against a pretty bad Browns defense. If Brissett is going to continue to lean on Jack Doyle, I think Jack Doyle is a good cheap tight end you can target this week at 3,600. If you are looking to punt tight end, I think he does make a lot of sense. And then there's one guy that probably my favorite tight end, probably the tight end I'll have the most exposure to, Zach Miller this week at just 3K going up against the Steelers. I just really like how this game script's going to work for Miller. I would imagine that the Steelers are going to get up on this, are going to get up and get a lead. So the Bears are probably going to be playing from behind. They're probably going to have to pass the ball. And in the Bears' 2 games this year, Miller, he has seen 6 and 9 targets, put up 7.9 and 10.2 DraftKings points. Miller isn't a guy that's going to go out there and get you 30 points, but when he's just 3K, seeing nearly 10 targets, I think he is definitely a good tight end option you can target if you are looking to go cheap, which is something I will be doing this week. Don't think I'm going to be paying up much for tight end. I like some of these guys in the 3K range. They're just going to see heavy workloads, and for Miller, the game script should be in his favor to where the Bears are going to have to pass a lot, so Miller should definitely see some targets. So I like him at just 3K. Then there's one guy under 3K, probably won't have much exposure, but did want to mention him. Ed Dickson going up against the Saints. Obviously, with Greg Olsen out, Dickson will become the starting tight end. But I'm not sure how much Cam's really going to throw the ball to him. I'd imagine Cam's just going to throw more to the receivers like Funchess and Benjamin. Not sure what Dickson's workload will be. Not sure how many targets he will see. But with Greg Olsen out, I did want to mention him as a guy if you're just looking for a straight-up punt. I think he makes some sense at 2,700. But yeah, those are just some tight ends this week. Like I said, I'm probably not going to be paying up. The one guy I would target if I was going to pay up, maybe have some exposure to Kelce, but not much. I think Kelce's a little bit overpriced. The guy I would pay up for would be Zach Ertz at 5K. But in the cheaper tier and the cheaper end, I like Marty Bennett at 4K. I think if Cobb and Jordy Nelson are both out, Bennett becomes a really good option. So should see a ton of targets. I also like Jack Doyle at 3,600. Brissett has really started to lean on him, so I think he makes some sense. And with the way the game script should work for the Bears, I like Zach Miller at 3K. Then if you're looking for just a straight-up punt, I think Ed Dickson makes some sense at 2,700. But yeah, those are just some tight ends I like this week. Let's go ahead and move on to defense. Alright, so at defense this week, I don't think I'm going to be paying up much here. I really like the mid-tier and the cheaper end at defense. I don't think I'm going to have any exposure to these top guys, or these top 4 right here. Don't think I'm going to play any of them. If I was to pay up, the one defense I would be looking at would be the Steelers going up against the Bears. The Bears' offense, it is pretty bad, and the Steelers' defense has looked really well this year, or they have played really well this year. They've been able to get pressure on the quarterback, and we saw Mike Glennon just play absolutely terrible last week against the Buccaneers. I believe the Buccaneers were the highest scoring defense on the slate last week. I know Glennon threw, I think he threw maybe 2 pick sixes. I'm not sure. I know he threw at least 1. So the Steelers are definitely in play at 3,400, going up against a really bad Bears offense. And I do like the Bucs as well. They're another team I think's in play, especially if Sam Bradford misses this game. If Bradford plays, probably won't have much exposure to the Bucs. But if Bradford is out and Case Keenum gets to start again for the Vikings, then I think the Buccaneers are a good option at 3,200. The defense I like, my favorite defense this week, really cheap I think. Just given their matchup, I think they're too cheap. And that's the Eagles at just 3K going up against the Giants. This Giants offense has just looked absolutely terrible this year. Eli Manning's been getting sacked a ton. The Giants O-line is just terrible. They're giving up a ton of sacks. And the Eagles' first 2 games this year, they've gotten 4 sacks in both of their first 2 games. So the Eagles definitely can get some pressure on the quarterback. And going up against the Giants O-line, they will give up some sacks. I think the Eagles are in a very good spot here, playing at home. Against the offense, it's just looked really bad this year. The Eagles are probably my favorite defense this week. Probably the defense I'll have the most exposure to. I really like them at just 3K. And then one more defense I want to mention in the 2K range. The Panthers at 2,600 going up against the Saints. Drew Brees has played very poorly in the past in Carolina. He's really struggled in Carolina. And this Panthers defense is very good. They've had some really solid games this year. They've only allowed 6 total points this year. Only allowed 3 points to Buffalo and only allowed 3 points to the 49ers. Got 3 and 4 sacks in both of those games. So I think the Panthers are too cheap at just 2,600 for how talented their defense is. I think they're in a good spot. Drew Brees really struggles outside of New Orleans, especially in Carolina. He's really struggled in Carolina in the past. So I do like the Panthers. If you are looking for a cheap punt defense, I think they make some sense at 2,600. But yeah, that's pretty much it for defense this week. I'm probably not going to be paying up. Going to be looking more towards the mid-tier. I like the Steelers in the mid-tier and also like the Buccaneers if Sam Bradford is out. And then the cheaper end, I like the Eagles. They're probably my favorite defense this week. And if you're looking for a punt defense, definitely should consider the Panthers at 2,600. But yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. These are my 5 core plays for this week. I went with Matt Ryan, Ty Montgomery, Julio Jones, Zach Miller, and the Eagles defense. I would definitely recommend you get some of these guys in your lineups. And I guess if you want to, you can build a lineup around this 5, around this core. But yeah, that is pretty much it. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Be sure to like the video and be sure to subscribe to the channel as well. I do upload these NFL videos every week, and I also do MLB and NBA videos daily. So make sure you are subscribed, and make sure you turn on notifications as well, so that way you'll never miss out on any new videos. And yeah, guys, that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you back for week 4. Good luck this week, guys. Peace.
Oh, sauce it down, sauce it up. You too much, ain't enough. Where you from? Throw it out, going nuts, going down. Oh, sauce it down, sauce it up. You too much, ain't enough.